Welcome to the FDA, Megyn. It's great to have you out here. We are not on a good path as a country in terms of the health outcomes of the population. We do great with sophisticated operations and amazing drugs that can treat certain kinds of lymphoma and other types of cures. But when it comes to the health of the population right now, we have had this massive area that we're not talking about that we need to be talking about, and that is the rise of all these chronic diseases. We've got 1 in 6 women now affected with autoimmune diseases. Half of kids are sick. Prediabetes affects about 20% of teens. 70% of kids are not qualifying for the military. So we've got to start talking about our problems and not just keep throwing medications at them.
Causes and not just possible cures, which often don't turn out to be anything of the sort. So let me start here. You've been here 17 days?
Day 17 today.
All right, so what are the biggest things that you've learned so far? What's jumped out at you as a civilian who now suddenly is in government service?
Well, I gotta be honest with you. I had a lot of emotions the last day I was in the operating room, the day before my Senate confirmation hearing. And so it's an entirely different world here. I'm on a listening tour. We're talking to the career scientists. We're trying to make sure they have all the resources they need to do their job well. We're trying to change the culture here to make it more of a teamwork culture. It's been very siloed. Each of the centers has developed their own fiefdom with their own communications department and lawyers and lobbyists for Congress and IT departments. And the IT systems don't talk. They're on different systems. So that's why you have, VAERS and FAIRS and CARES and 10 different adverse event reporting systems. We probably need one really good one. So I'm doing an inventory right now, trying to assess the lay of the land. And then we're also trying to change the culture to a culture of teamwork, the scientific gold standard and common sense working together. And that is our goal right now. We are now taking a much wider view. And you mentioned the opioid issue. That probably is the quintessential example of what's wrong with a cozy relationship when the regulator agency is captured by the industry. The person who literally authorized OxyContin then went to work for Purdue Pharma.
Curtis Wright.
Exactly. And
he worked here, he authorized OxyContin, he approved a label that suggested it wasn't really that addictive, if at all. And then after he left here, he went to work for Purdue Pharma, the very company he helped.
Sweetheart deal. And that label was illegal, in my opinion. It was an indication for chronic pain, for round-the-clock, long-term use, and it was based on a 14-day study. And so that kind of mistake can result in 1 million Americans losing their lives. And when you don't have good post-approval monitoring, as this agency has not had, you discover things decades later. We discovered Vioxx killed maybe 38,000 plus Americans years after it was approved. We discovered 1 million Americans died of opioids and overdoses over a decade after the OxyContin label was given. Why weren't we monitoring in real time people who were getting it immediately after approval? In part, the answer to that question is we couldn't do it. We didn't have the data. It was too sophisticated. You'd have to have everybody registered in a study. Now we have giant big data from electronic health records nationally. Now we can have our researchers and universities go in there and look at everyone who's taken a new medication matched to somebody who's similar who is not taking that medication and look at the adverse event rate and ask, is it working? Is there a safety signal? When you don't do that, people get suspicious, and they are suspicious about the cozy relationship sometimes that results in approvals. And they're also suspicious when they hear stories and they don't have hard data. You don't have great rates about certain complications when you just have self-reported data. Self-reported data is terrible data.
Yeah, it could be any, like, how do you know if my sleepless night was due to the COVID vaccine or I'm stressed out?
That's right. And in the void of good scientific data, every opinion fills that void. So we can do a better job. And if we have good post-approval monitoring of drugs and devices, then we can also tell companies, hey, instead of doing 2 randomized controlled trials to get your drug on the market, how about 1, and we'll take a close look in the post-approval monitoring. how the drug is doing in real time immediately after it's approved. And that's particularly important when you're talking about rare diseases. When you talk about a genetic issue that affects 52 kids in the world, and that's a real thing. There is a condition that affects 50, or 15 kids. That's also a real thing. You can't expect the companies to do a randomized control trial. You'll kill innovation. You'll kill investment in those innovative ideas. You've got to say, hey, this is a very difficult condition. It's incurable. It's fatal. It's a permanent disability. We're going to customize the approval process to the condition. And so we're going to be rolling out a new pathway for drugs, which is a pathway based on a plausible mechanism. If there's a rare condition or a condition that's incurable, that affects a small number of people, we may be approving drugs based on a plausible mechanism on sort of a conditional basis.
What does that mean? Put that in normal speak.
Let's say there's a condition that affects 75 people in the world, and there's a new treatment that makes sense physiologically. The mechanism is scientifically plausible that this treatment would help these individuals. No one's forcing these medications on these individuals. If they want to try these new medications, even though we don't have a randomized control trial because it's not feasible, we will allow that and at the same time monitor everybody who gets it so that we can make inferences as soon as the data speaks with a signal in the data.
Wow.
We're going to know. We're going to do intense, comprehensive research. And that's why if we have massive electronic health record data, which we now have through something called the Health Information Exchange, we can have researchers go into there and look at real-world complication rates. So we're not relying on self-reported data from which you can make no inferences about rates. That's just a basic scientific methodologic principle. When you have a couple people saying, hey, I had this or I had this, you can't infer what the rate is. That is the frequency per unit time. But when you have comprehensive data, which we only have now because of cloud storage ability, we couldn't do this 10 years ago. We have now tremendous big data where we can go in there and look at, here's 100,000 people who took this product. Let's follow them in the data, de-identified to protect privacy, and look at how many people came back to the hospital. Not just came back to the hospital with myocarditis coded, but who came into a clinic and said, my chest hurts. That, once you have good methodologic capture of outcomes, now you're looking at real rates. You know, sometimes you have to block out some of the noise where now he's taking a different view. I never met the guy, but those are the different ideas people have on people. There's a lot of talented people who can do that job well. A lot of very smart people who are right now who are applying for that job.
My guess in knowing you is you want people who welcome that kind of questioning. Let's have more questions. Let's search that up. Let's run that down. Not somebody who, like we've had, shuts down any questioning that doesn't toe the party line.
We are not going to be shutting down ideas that may be different from my ideas. We should welcome that. Science is based on challenging deeply held assumptions where there's no good evidence. What we call medical dogma. That is the scientific process. And so we shouldn't be shutting down other ideas. We should be inviting them. Well, we have to do two things. Number one is we have to partner with industry and pharma to facilitate the process, to make it user-friendly and expeditious. We shouldn't be in a receive-only mode. We want American pharma companies to do well and companies that do business in the United States to do well. But the scientific evaluation needs to be independent. And that's why today we're announcing we are removing industry members, pharma members from FDA advisory committees. I was shocked when I learned that employees of big pharma companies sit on FDA advisory committees as members of those committees. So we're going to be replacing them whenever statutorily possible with patients and family caregivers. We are going to be inviting pharma companies to send representatives to the advisory committees, but they can sit with the rest of the public and watch and pose questions as the rest of the American public can. So
that speaks to it's not. It doesn't stop at FDAers leaving and going directly to big pharma to work pushing the drugs they just approved while government employees. It's also while the FDA is approving those drugs, big pharma right now has a role in pushing for it in advising the people who are the decision makers. And so on that second piece of it, at least, right now, you're stopping that.
We're stopping that for every committee where we can by statute, and we're replacing them with patients and family caregivers. And the idea is that there should not be a cozy relationship. There should be a user-friendly process for industry, but not a cozy relationship. Because let's be honest, a lot of people in the United States feel that the system is rigged. A lot of people feel that the relationship is too cozy between pharma and regulators. And so this is an agency that belongs to the American people. And so we can work with pharma and at the same time ensure that scientific evaluation process is totally independent. And on those advisory committees, the pharma and device members of those advisory committees will say that they're non-voting members. But that is a sort of a close club of individuals that has a running dialogue, and they meet and they become friendly. And it's okay to be friendly, but we need the scientific evaluation, the voting, to be totally independent. And so people ask, are you anti-pharma or pro-pharma? Mm-hmm. And the reality is we're pro-pharma, but our evaluation has to be independent. And we cannot have any more indications for chronic pain written for a drug based on a 14-day study where the regulator then goes immediately and works for the company. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of thing that breeds distrust. And that's why people perceive that this agency, the FDA, has been captured by industry, and it is not captured by industry. It is owned by the American people right now. What I don't understand is if there's enough preliminary data to suggest that there may be carcinogenic effects or genomic disruption or associations with attention deficit disorder, or a whole plethora of families that are saying, hey, once we started eliminating these petrochemical food colorings from the food of my child, their behavior improved. When you have enough of that, it's not, look, they're not giant randomized control studies over 10 years for each food dye. We're not going to get that. But when you have enough preliminary data to suggest these petrochemical food dyes are concerning, who then would conclude, you know what, let's just risk it. It's fine. We'll wing it. We'll be, the kids will maybe fine with, why do that?
Right.
When we have all of these chronic diseases increasing right in front of our eyes that were rare a generation ago.
There are some actual, serious drugs that can help people. And so one of the concerns behind people who back Big Pharma is how much is all of this, some of the stuff we're talking about, going to slow down the approval process for new drugs or drugs in testing?
We're speeding up the approval process. We made an announcement last week that we are reducing the requirements for some perfunctory things like animal testing. Why are we testing every single drug in chimpanzees and dogs, usually beagles, because they're obedient?
That's so sad.
It's sad, and it's unnecessary. Some of these drugs are already approved in other countries, in humans. So you have a drug already in use in humans in other countries, and we're requiring animal testing before. So we are now, we've put out a release that we are now taking steps to reduce the animal testing requirement. It's cruel to the animals sometimes. It's unnecessary. And we live in a modern world where we have computational modeling using AI that can evaluate a molecule and predict its toxicity in humans better than the animal testing. We also have something called organ-on-a-chip technology, where, say, liver cells are grown in the lab.
Sounds like a terrible appetizer.
Yeah, I personally cannot eat liver. I've operated on the liver too much.
Oh,
That's
God.
one food I cannot do.
No one wants organ-on-a-chip.
Yeah, organ-on-a-chip. So in the lab, they grow these cells, and then they introduce the drug. And you can actually see whether or not it injures the cells better than if you inject some bunny rabbit that it's not going to talk to you and say, my liver hurts. So these new technologies have the promise of replacing some of this routine animal testing. You would cut 6 months out of that approval process. You lower R&D costs for pharma companies and inventors, which could lower drug prices for everyday Americans. And it reduces animal use. There's too much animal use.
Are there any other areas where AI can come and help as we move into the 21st century?
Yeah, we're bringing in a team that is really exciting. They're going to introduce AI into the review process to help the reviewer, to make the reviewer's work stream much more streamlined and summarize things. There are parts of the drug application that are so perfunctory, that are outdated, that could be streamlined, that could be abstracted with AI to help the reviewer.
So here, like all other aspects of government that Trump is taking on, you're saying there's actually too much red tape, that we're red taping the wrong things, it sounds like you're saying.
Why does it take 10 years to bring a drug to market in the United States? Because of the regulatory steps. I mean, people are dying. People need cures and meaningful treatments. And my predecessor in this role was focused, as he stated, his number one goal was fighting misinformation. Well, our number one goal is delivering cures and meaningful treatments and healthier foods for Americans. That is our focus. And that's my job as a leader, to try to win their confidence, and I hope to do it by upholding my mission to put out there gold standard science and common sense together. We can do both. Healthier food for children, rebuilding the public trust, and focusing not on the peripheral distractions, but focusing on cures and meaningful treatments for Americans.